let me just say that in
Yeah.
2015, the NBL was actually bought by real estate mogul Larry Kesselman
Yeah.
for
Seven. Was it? Seven?
$7 million.
$7 million. So isn't that interesting?
Well,
Like,
if you want the NBL, you can buy it for $7 million.
Red Hot
yeah.
Underdogs rocking the night. Anzac and Bluey bringing the fight. Talk about the game ain't just one side. Whistles blowing, sirens loud lights. Energy pumping, scheming plot. Nothing too small, nothing forgot. Boxing gloves and footy kicks. Sport and no
Three,
sport.
two, one. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Red Hot Underdogs. I am Anzac, and with me tonight is the ever incredible, long contained, often imitated, never duplicated. Put your hands together for the man of the moment, Drewy.
Hey, buddy. Hey, everybody. Welcome to the podcast that is well and truly on the endangered species list of podcasts.
Yes.
But despite all that, we're still here.
Yeah, we're not
And
extinct. Do you know what I mean?
that's right.
There's a big difference between the dodo and I'm trying to think of an animal that's on the endangered, like the panda, you know?
Yes.
Yeah, big difference.
If you don't like us, then suck shit
Yeah,
because we're here to stay. So
yeah,
remember to like and subscribe.
yeah. If you don't
But
like
just,
us, so you just say, if you don't like us, then suck shit.
yes. So remember to like and subscribe.
Yeah, yeah,
It's very
yeah.
much an oxymoron. It's very much all over the place, which reminds me that this episode is slightly different. I know this
Yeah,
year we've been very top heavy as far as the NRL is
yeah,
concerned, but we are actually going to delve into a sport that a lot of fans in Australia would never have thought that we would ever delve into,
yeah,
which
yep,
is indeed the NBL. And I didn't even think that we'd ever be dedicating a sport to the NBL, but we thought we'd think outside the
yep,
square, think outside the hoop,
yep,
think outside the ring,
yep.
and
Australian
actually,
basketball. Australian basketball.
yeah.
Why not? You know, like there's a lot going for it, maybe. Is there? Well, I mean, basketball's a great sport. Let's just start there, right? You know, like, yeah.
It is a good sport.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, this episode is very Red Hot Underdogs centric in the
Yeah.
fact that we, well, the name says it all, Red Hot Underdogs,
Yeah.
people that underachieve or don't hit the highest level. So
Yeah.
the NBL, unfortunately, over the years hasn't hit the highest level. We'd probably all like it to, but
Yeah.
to be honest, for the most part, and at least for say the last 30 years, it's been a pretty epic fail,
Yeah. Okay.
I
Okay.
believe.
But you know,
But
it's you know, the league has been a fail, not the sport. Do you know what I mean?
the
Because
league has been a
yeah, the
fail.
Australian league, because um, you know, in the world,
Yes.
it's one of the biggest sports in the world, and has one of the best leagues in the world, the NBA. Like the amount of people that
Yes.
follow it, the money in it, you know. The
Yes.
Phoenix Suns, right,
Yes.
was recently sold. Do you want to have a guess how much that team's worth?
For majority stake, I believe it's $4 billion.
Exactly. Do you know what I mean? That
Yes.
dwarfs any
Anything.
Australian sport, any Australian team by billions.
To
Billions.
put to put that into perspective, let me just say that in
Yeah.
2015, the NBL was actually bought by real estate mogul Larry Kesselman
Yeah.
for
Seven. Was it? Seven?
$7 million.
$7 million. So isn't that interesting?
Well,
Like,
if you want the NBL, you can buy it for $7 million.
yeah, yeah. Well,
Yeah.
that's kind of cool, you know? Like,
Although ten years on it would be a bit more than that because
yeah.
the Perth Wildcats in 2021 were actually sold for $8.5 million.
Okay, yeah, well, there you go. Okay, that's
You know,
interesting.
that's inflation. So, it's 10 years on, it would be worth more now, but like small peanuts
Yeah,
compared to the mighty NBA. But to put things into
but yeah,
perspective,
in the perspective, you were talking about this bloke bought it for 7 million. What year again?
2015.
Yeah. And but in a nutshell,
Yeah.
the NBL started in 1979, right?
Yeah.
And
Yes.
got really, really, really popular,
Yeah.
and then nosedived for ages and ages and ages and ages, and
Yes.
then has seen a bit of a, or not has seen a bit of a, has definitely seen a increase in professionalism, in money and players, in bums on seats. Um,
You're right. Well, I mean,
yeah,
by the 90s, it actually got quite a bit of traction.
yeah, yeah,
Early 90s to mid
yeah,
90s.
yeah, and maybe that was,
Unfortunately, by the late 90s, it started to peter out a bit again.
but
But
for
yeah,
us, like we being, you know, 47, 48. You 48,
yeah,
yeah, yeah, you're 48. Yeah, I'm 40,
48, yeah.
still young,
Yeah,
47.
yeah, yeah, sort of. Sort of. It comes with a caveat and a massive asterisk.
Oh,
But
still young.
I will
But,
say, I will say,
we grew up, Drewy,
yeah,
with the
the
when
rise.
basketball was getting bigger and better every year.
It was pretty massive at some
Yeah.
point. I'm not going to say huge, but I
No,
will say
it's
it
not
was.
huge, dude. It was huge, especially for a couple of, 9-year-olds and stuff.
Yeah,
Like
yeah, yeah.
it had like games you wanted to go to on the weekend. Yes.
It had a bit of clout. I will say
It
this.
had
It had
superstars. It had
it had
superstars.
recognizable names. That's exactly what I was going to say.
Australian
That
superstars.
there
Yes.
were people like Andrew Gaze and
Yep.
what came and Steve Carfino, later on Shane Heal.
Yep.
All of these people were people that people knew that
Yep.
didn't even necessarily follow sport just
Yep.
because it was at a point where it got semi-big. So I put this to you now.
You
If you walk
you're
down the
wrong.
street now, let
You're
me just say
wrong.
this. If
Okay.
you walk down the street now, I
Yeah,
think most people would be flat out
you're wrong.
naming some of the big stars.
Okay, you're right there, but you're wrong
Yes.
calling basketball was semi-big because it was big. Okay.
It was big. It
It
was
was
big.
as big
Mm.
as rugby league at that
I'm
time.
not going to say that. It was
It was
just a
big.
fraction under.
Well, I don't think so. I think
The Kings got massive, Wildcats got massive, all of these sides, Brisbane Bulls, they're all pretty big, but it was just a portion underneath it. But I will admit,
so. You
it
don't
did
think
get
they
to a
were
level of
rugby league?
notoriety.
Okay, yeah. The stars weren't cricket stars. I mean, who were the biggest stars in,
Oh,
in, in the 80s and early 90s? It was cricket stars, really? Was it cricket
yes, yes.
stars?
Oh, it's always been cricket stars. Cricket is Australia's biggest sport, closely
It was rugby
followed
league
by,
stars too. It was rugby
yeah,
league
yeah.
stars. I know it was Aussie rules stars, but I wasn't as into the Aussie rules when I was that age.
If
But regardless, to me, I didn't know whether a rugby league star or a basketball star. You just knew the names. You knew the faces. You knew the names. You had the cards.
Yeah.
They were on TV. They're on McDonald's ads,
Yes.
dude. They're on
Yeah,
McDonald's.
that's
You know.
That's the other thing that's killed it in later years, though. So, what I was saying earlier, which you did agree with, like back in the day, you had recognizable names like
Yep.
Andrew Gaze and Steve
Yep.
Carfino, and
Yep.
later on Shane Heal, so on and so forth. These days, you're flat out naming two or three or even one NBL star
Okay,
for the
we
most part,
are.
because it's not actually on.
We are, Drewy, but
Yeah.
but are the 9-year-olds
Mm,
of these age of this
yeah.
day,
Mm.
can they name them? Do you know what I mean?
I don't think so as much. I'll tell you why. I've got a reason. because when we were growing up, a lot of these matches were on free-to-air TV.
Yes.
You didn't have Foxtel and the pay TV.
Yeah.
So now it's actually even made it worse, ironically, that it's
Yeah.
not on free-to-air
Well,
TV. It's tucked around
what sport is,
ESPN.
Joey? What sport is?
Yeah, what is, that's
Yeah.
right.
Like
That's right. But the problem is right now,
Ariana's put the dog out and it's
yeah,
scratching and annoying me.
yeah,
Now I'm going to
very
do a
good.
podcast
Oh, well,
with the
you just
dog
focus
scratching.
on the screen ahead.
I'm
But
trying to think about Australian basketball here.
no, no, but
He was also scratching.
I will tell you something
Yeah,
though.
tell me.
The problem is back then you could have it on free-to-air TV and you
Yes.
didn't have Foxtel and all the other
And
streaming
it
services.
was on free to air TV.
But now the problem is AFL and rugby league are already huge,
Yeah,
and it has to compete with those
yeah.
to the point where
You know
the
what it's
NBL
competing with?
season is hang on, the NBL season is actually not in the winter season of football. So it actually runs from October,
Yeah,
and the grand final series actually starts just when the rugby league and AFL begin
yeah. I say that bit
in
again.
early March. And
So
and I think that's a way of saying people invest their time and energy to watch it. So then by the time the grand final series starts, it's only sort of round one, and people go, well, I've watched it for this long, I may as well watch it the grand final series.
yeah.
And they have to go off grid and not uh in the rugby league and AFL season, essentially. But what I will say
Look,
is,
sport is becoming more popular, right?
yeah,
More
yeah,
people go to games. There's more people. Okay.
yes.
However, there's less kind of free sports in your face, and are kids less into it now? Is that okay to say that, or no? I don't know, man.
I think they are because unfortunately, whether you agree with me or not, I just think that the likes of AFL and NRL are just too massive to compete with. And in
Yeah,
the summer, it's got to come up with against cricket. So it's sort of found itself in some sort of strange no man's land. I will say this. It's not only, it's also been very poorly run. There are actually a total of 34 defunct teams
okay.
throughout the course of the NBL history,
Yeah. Okay. Well,
which
look,
is huge.
I'm kind of disagreeing with you a bit, Joey, because like since doing this podcast, I've done research into this and
Yeah,
too.
that's
And
good.
in my opinion, I
Yeah.
think that since 2015, the NBL has been doing well.
It's been doing better. Yeah. I wouldn't say well, it's been doing better. I think it's been on the improve, yes. But there was that graveyard period from, say, 2005 to 2015 is probably the worst. But yeah, you're probably trying to bring up some sort of pie chart right
Yeah,
now
yeah.
or whatever.
I did get
Yeah.
one, but the problem is you know, I'm not very good at this stuff.
No, but that's okay. Uh,
Yeah, I'm gonna.
while you try and bring it up,
Yeah,
I'll just quickly
you get
list
talking. Yeah. Okay.
I'll just quickly list some of the 34 defunct teams because
Yeah.
that's
Listen
a
to
great
fun
big
teams.
filler for the podcast.
I'll try
So
and find this. Yeah. I'll try and find
while
this.
you do that, I'll mention the teams that have come and sadly gone.
Yeah.
We've had the Bankstown Bruins, Canberra Cannons, Sydney Astronauts, Sydney Supersonics, Coburg Giants, North Melbourne Giants, Devonport Warriors, Frankston Bears, Geelong Cats, Geelong Super Cats, Glenelg Tigers, Gold Coast Rollers, Gold Coast Cougars, Gold Coast Blaze, Hobart Devils, Hunter Pirates, Launceston
You're going
Casino
too
City.
fast. This is too
Yeah,
fast.
well, there are a lot of them. Otherwise, I'll be there all
Yeah, but
night.
like
Newcastle
I'm
Falcons.
actually enjoying listening to these, and you're going too quick, Drewy.
All right, Nuttawading Spectres, West Sydney
Hang on, slow
Western,
down there. The what? Nut what? Nut what?
Nuttawading, Nuttawading.
Where's
It's in
that?
Victoria.
Nuttawatting.
Nuttawading.
Nuttawatting.
Nuttawading.
Okay.
Nuttawading.
Okay.
Uh, West Sydney West Stars, Singapore Slingers, South Dragons, Southeast Melbourne Magic, St Kilda Saints, Westside Saints, Townsville Crocodiles, South Melbourne Saints, Victoria Titans, West Adelaide Bearcats, West Sydney Razorbacks, Sydney Spirit, Forestville Eagles, not to be confused with the Forestville in New South Wales.
Yeah,
That is
where's the other
in,
Forestville?
that's in South Australia.
Oh yeah.
Adelaide City Eagles and the East Side Spectres.
Spectres.
So I wanted to sort of speed it up a
What's
bit
their
because
mascot?
otherwise they were there all night,
Some
Mitch.
spectacles. You know, what's the
No, a
spectre?
spectre is like a ghost.
A spectre. I thought it just
Yeah.
okay. I was just thinking like glasses, like spectacles.
No,
You
it's
know,
like a ghost,
they got
you
like
know.
they got a
It's
nerd.
like a Grim Reaper with the hood. That's a spectre.
Did
Yeah.
you know that, or you knew that since
No,
you?
no, I knew that. I remember going back in the day. I actually remember watching a game back in 1990 where the Sydney Kings played the Southeast Melbourne Spectres
Spectres, not inspect,
in
like Inspector Gadget, you know, not
no
no, no.
in the Sydney Entertainment Centre. They later on became the Southeast Melbourne Magic.
That's better.
So,
Yeah,
and there have been actually a few clubs that have been horrendously mismanaged.
yeah.
Like, for instance, the St Kilda Saints were around from were the St Kilda Saints, then they became the West Side Saints, then they became the South Melbourne Saints, and later on they just became the South Dragons.
Oh, just like we
So they've had about six or seven
religious
transformations.
sanus isn't working. We got to flip it on a head. We got to be something evil like a dragon. A dragon.
Yeah, I mean, the other one that you look at, which has never worked well in any sport and continues to be a car crash to this day, has been any form of Gold Coast
Oh, I was
franchise.
hoping you'd say Gold Coast. Tell us about the rugby. I almost said rugby league. Tell us about basketball and the Gold Coast.
So you had initially the Gold Coast Cougars, which were from 1990 to 1992.
Right, because cougars are like, like a cougar is, a hoochie mama, like a
Correct.
older,
Yeah.
good-looking
Yeah.
woman or man,
And there
I
were
said
a few
woman.
Cougars on the
Yeah,
Gold Coast. I
yeah.
don't think they were that forward thinking back then in those days from
But now it
1990
is.
to 92, but now. And then from 1992 they folded and then
Yeah.
they became the Gold Coast Rollers from
Ah,
1992 to 96 because someone bought them out,
like
changed
it's
it to
in
Gold Coast Rollers.
roller skates.
I guess so.
Yeah,
Why not? The sun, the fun, the surf probably was.
yeah.
And then,
I mean, probably
funnily
it was
enough,
1992. It was probably roller blades then. That was the roller blades
possibly,
craze. You know.
possibly. And then they folded in 96. So then a decade later became the Gold Coast Blaze. So they had a 10
Blades.
year 10-year hiatus.
Yeah.
So then, but the Gold Coast Blaze only lasted from '06 to 2012.
Yep. Yep. Yep.
My all-time favorite team of all were the Glenelg Tigers.
Glenelg. I
They
know
came,
Glenelg. I know Glenelg. No, Glenelg. That's the town between Melbourne and Adelaide. Yeah.
yeah, and it's actually a palindrome. You know what a palindrome is?
Yeah. Yeah. It is front to
It
back.
spells the same way back and forth. But
Yeah.
you know the reason why I like the
How do you
Glenelg?
spell it?
Glenelg.
Glenelg. Yeah, okay, it is a palindrome. And don't you think they should have made the word palindrome a palindrome? You know?
Maybe.
Yeah.
In other words, they'd have a different word for that. But I will tell you why I like them so
Yeah, all
much.
right.
You know why?
Now, what are they called again?
The Glenelg Tigers. You know why I liked them? Because they came in 1979.
Yep.
They came last in 1979,
Yep.
and they were never in the NBL again.
That's it.
That's it. They had
Oh, wow.
one
1 year fluffed.
one year. That was
They
them
were there for
done.
the first year, right?
Yes, that's
What,
all.
what
And they
teams
came up.
came out in 1979 and are still in it? There's one, is it? It's just Illawarra.
Okay. So yeah, I'm glad you asked this.
Yeah.
So it has changed a bit. So 1979 saw
Yep.
the Nunawading Spectres, the Newcastle Falcons, the
Falcons.
Glenelg Tigers,
Tigers.
City of Sydney Astronauts.
Whoa, 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 whoa. Sydney.
Yes, but they were called City of Sydney Astronauts back
The
then.
astronauts.
Yes.
Oh,
Like,
that is bad. Seriously, that is bad. You know, who
and
thought
that is horrendous, but
like
at least
we're Aussies, we've got that many possible Australian animal mascots and
yes.
choose an ass. But in the 70s too, like this is way past the space race. Do you know what I mean? Like
Mate, it fits in well with this podcast. A couple of space cadets talking about the City of Sydney astronauts
yes, yes.
fits like an absolute glove.
Like,
So,
I guess you kind of like because astronauts jump,
yes.
they'd be good at basketball.
So
You
I will just go
Low
off on a
gravity
tangent.
crew, low gravity. Yeah.
I'll, that no gravity. I'll go off on a ta
But low
slight tangent
gravity,
here
not
then.
no gravity, low gravity. You
Low gravity. I got you.
can't
I
you
got
can't play basketball in no gravity. That wouldn't
no.
work. Yeah.
That's true. So they were from 79 to 81.
Oh yeah.
And then Sydney Supersonics
Others
took
too.
over, which is a better name.
Yeah.
No, because the astronauts folded or drifted off into space.
Oh, and then
And
they
then
changed.
they became the Sydney Supersonics from 82 to
Now,
87.
you know what supersonic is, right?
Yeah, something
What?
that's supersonic.
Like what?
Enlighten me.
Oh, supersonic. Supersonic's when you break the sound barrier.
Speed. Sound barrier. Very
Yeah.
good.
Like in
So,
what's his name? Guile in Street Fighter.
yes,
Sonic
yes.
boom. He's breaking the supersonic sound barrier, and when you break the sound barrier, you hear a pop.
A sonic boom. That's
Sonic,
right.
supersonic.
So
Yeah,
so
supersonic.
anyway, I'll get through this list.
Yeah.
Let me start again. The
No rush,
1979.
mate. It's no rush.
No,
I'm in no
it was
rush.
the it was the Nunawading Spectres, Newcastle Falcons, Glenelg Tigers, City of Sydney Astronauts,
Astronauts.
Brisbane Bullets,
Oh, that's good.
Canberra Cannons,
There's
which
a
were there
big
for
story
quite a
about
while.
Canberra, right? Going to talk
Yeah,
about them soon.
yeah, we will soon.
Okay.
Bankstown, Bankstown Bruins.
I like that. Hang on, slow down.
Yeah.
Bankstown. So Sydney's Bankstown, right? There's only Sydney's Bankstown, right? Yeah.
Yes, yes. So,
Bankstown.
and
Wait, slow down. A Bruin.
it's a bear.
You sure?
Yes, a Bruin is a bear. I researched it
It's a,
specifically.
it's a
You
breed.
don't need to research it any more than that. I've done my due
Okay, all
diligence.
right. It's
A
not a
Bruin,
koala bear. Like, where is the Bruin bear from?
it's a baby bear.
A Bruin is
It's a
a baby
Bruin.
bear.
Yes, correct.
Okay.
I've done my research. It needs
Like,
no further
ah,
explanation. No, no,
okay.
that's it. That's
They
it.
might
I'm
as well
not
be the
biting
teddy
the.
bears. Come on.
No, we're
You know,
not going into the honey pot anymore. I've told you, and
Bankstown teddy bears, you know?
yeah, but a Bruin sounds
So
much
good.
more macho.
Teddy.
That's right. Uh, the St Kilda Saints, not really particularly original. It's a
But
full
I
rip-off
I
from
think that stuff
AFL.
works, you know?
Yeah,
It works.
we had the West Adelaide Bearcats,
That's right, yeah. Oh, did
and
you Google what is a bear cat?
no, I didn't do that.
Well,
And
I
the
can
Illawarra Hawks. That's another time, another day. And the Illawarra Hawks. So
okay.
the only ones that have survived have been the Illawarra Hawks and the Brisbane Bullets in that one.
Yeah, wow. So Brisbane
And
Bullets still
and
around.
that's another point of difference. What I want to make known as probably the reason why it's going more successful now than in the early days, and probably what they should have done midway through when the NBL started to get to its pomp and its peak
Yeah,
would have been to have more centralized locations, like e.g. major cities, which
yeah,
they've got now. So they've got
yeah,
10 now,
yeah,
10 teams. So I'll quickly run through what we got now,
yeah.
which
Okay. Yeah,
are
yeah, yeah. What do we got now?
the Sydney Kings, the Illawarra Hawks, Melbourne United, Southeast Melbourne Phoenix,
I know.
Perth Wildcats,
Yeah,
Adelaide 36ers,
yeah,
Tasmania Jack Jumpers,
yeah.
Brisbane Bullets, New Zealand Breakers, and the Cairns Taipans.
And the biggest one is the newest one is the Jack Jumpers from
Yeah,
Tasmania, and we were
and
excited about that. Remember the Red Hot Underdogs? We went on about them. That's the last time
yes,
we spoke about basketball, like when they came in and they won. They got to the
because
grand
we did
final.
we
Yeah.
did previously have the Tasmania Devils that lasted till about 96.
Ah, are you serious? Okay.
Yeah, there was a Tasmanian Devils side. So
Yeah.
that was another one back in the day. So that was a great reunion. The fact that eventually down the track Jack Jumpers came in and
Yeah.
won the 23-24 series,
You know, they've got little
2023.
because the Jack Jumpers and ant, they got little ants on the jersey. Did you know?
Yeah. Yes. And unfortunately we didn't mention this year's one earlier on in the season, which was the Illawarra Hawks
Yeah.
beating Melbourne United 3-2. And that was another thing we probably might have mentioned in the podcast if it was a bit more publicized.
Yeah.
It only gets a small byline in
Yeah.
newspapers,
Yeah.
tiny clips on YouTube, not much publicity these days.
Yeah. But for people that love basketball in Australia,
Yeah.
do they follow
Yeah.
the NBL or do they follow the American NBA?
I think a lot of them sadly follow the NBA,
True, isn't it? You know,
which
it's
is a
like,
pretty bad indictment on the NBL when we're trying to make a homegrown product flourish.
yeah. But the again, for Australia to have quality Australian basketball players,
Yeah,
for the Olympics or,
yeah,
which is there's probably, we could name 10 countries now that are really good
yeah,
at basketball, right? You know,
yeah.
there's
And
there's not none. There's a few. It's popular in a lot of countries. And for Australia to be good at basketball,
yeah,
what helps that is a thriving local league.
I'm glad you mentioned that. And unfortunately, the government, and I don't blame them, isn't willing to pump a whole lot of money into basketball throughout Australia and the NBL because you think about it, with all of these defunct teams that I've mentioned,
Yeah,
it's no wonder because they look at the basketball as a bit of a joke. Like 34 defunct teams is ridiculous
yeah.
throughout the NBL's history, and they
But
go,
you know
well,
what?
what do you think we're going to pump money into your grassroots and to a new stadium and new
That's then,
equipment?
this is now. Like since
I know
2015, do you know the biggest crowd that they've ever had in NBL? Do you know when it was?
you're about to tell me.
Well, I was hoping you knew the exact dates and the teams, and I do know the teams. Oh, we only got 10 minutes to go, cuz.
Only got 10
It
minutes to
it
go.
was this year, man. It was this year in
Wow, there you
January.
go.
Sydney Kings playing the Jack Jumpers. And do you know what? I would have gone to that. I would have gone to that,
It's interesting you mention that because that's
19,000 something. Yeah.
That's a good statistic. But
Yeah.
you know what?
Yeah.
Despite that, there seems like some sort of huge injustice and irony because despite that, it still seems as though it's very much in the darkness in
Okay,
Australian
well,
sport.
it
Or
does.
maybe it's just me.
I
Maybe
think
it's
it is a little bit you. And when I say
yeah,
you, I mean us too,
us. Yeah,
because
yeah,
I just watched a couple of these things, and the NBL is
yeah,
attracting, it always got, like all the internationals who played for the NBL, like even when we were little kids, they were always
Yes,
Americans and hadn't made it in America, you know,
yes, yes,
they hadn't made it in the NBA. But now
yeah,
there are some big, good, established players and not has-beens. I'm not talking about has-beens, Drewy.
yeah, yeah.
I don't know names. You don't know names, but
No,
there's young players now that have
yes,
a future in basketball that are
yeah, yeah,
playing in the NBL right
yes,
now.
yeah,
Right
yeah, 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 yeah.
now.
Yeah, I think they said something like 12 players have been drafted from the NBL to the NBA in its time, which isn't a lot, but it shows that we're
Oh, okay,
still able to
going
get some
NBL to
talent.
NBA. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
Well, but what about if the Australian Basketball League is getting some really good young players? I mean,
yeah.
that's success, right?
That's success. Yeah, and we'll just see how it goes in the future. Maybe it will improve. I
Yeah.
just, you
How?
know what would,
So let's say how. Let's say it is improving. What are
mm,
some, because it definitely is. What are some things that the NBL can do to, ensure it's, the kids like you and I
yeah, yeah.
have these superstars
I'll
and
tell you one thing.
tell me what are they?
I think one of them, which is important and kind of gets overlooked, it
Mm,
might be nice if they could have at least 2 games a week tucked away on free-to-air TV rather than on ESPN.
yes.
Because let's face it, ESPN is a big channel in America.
Yeah.
Not many Aussies, even with Foxtel, tune into ESPN, let's be
And
honest.
like that was big news that
Yeah.
signed with that channel, but
Yeah.
Aussies don't have it.
Even if it's on like 7 Mate or 9 Gem, I
Yeah,
think it'll be a step in the right direction for the
totally
NBA.
agree. Free to air, Friday night, Saturday night. One Friday, one
Yeah.
Saturday, a decent time, you know.
Yeah, yeah.
They
Precisely.
also it was a winter sport.
Yeah.
They were worried about Aussie rules
Mm.
and they changed it to a summer sport. Like it actually was, but
Yes.
they were competing for the fans,
I'm,
and stadium,
I'm glad you mentioned that
yeah,
because right when basketball seemed to be on the rise
yes,
in the late 80s and early 90s,
yes,
the AFL and NRL actually, and more so the AFL back then,
yeah,
started to schedule their games exactly at the same time
yeah,
that
wow,
the NBL did.
yeah, yeah,
Absolutely given the boot up the arse. So it would be like somebody coming to a small town,
yeah,
starting up their own hardware business,
yeah.
and then 3 weeks later, some rich millionaire puts a Bunnings next to it.
Next door, yeah, yeah.
It's the
Um,
essential kick up the arse that it
like
didn't
that, but
need.
it's nothing like that. I'm sure you could have
It's a
done.
bit like that though. It's like we're a bigger product. We're going to schedule you right when you are scheduled yours.
You could have done a better comparison than that. But
I liked my
I'll
comparison.
give it like 3 out of 10. But Drew,
I thought it was an 11, and I'm going to die on that fucking hill.
well, I'd like to think of a better one, but I can't. So there you go.
That's right. I win. You're like the Glenelg Tigers.
Yeah.
You couldn't come up with anything. I'm more like a Perth Wildcats, who I believe have won the most
You're
titles.
like a cougar, mate. You're more like a cougar than a wildcat, honestly.
But you know, it is funny. Even in Sydney, though,
Yeah.
the whole situation wasn't handled very well from an administration point of view
Yeah.
because the astronauts turned into the Supersonics,
Yeah.
and the Bankstown Bruins actually turned into the West Sydney West Stars
Yeah. But
from
like,
86 to 87. So then all of those teams
yeah.
from the West and Central Sydney then go, bang, we're going to be the Kings.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that they back then they were forward thinking back then having like Central Sydney and Western Sydney, even back
Yeah.
then.
I mean, yeah, a
decade of,
derby's great idea. Yeah.
but they couldn't make it happen. And that's when the Kings
Yeah.
came into fruition
Yeah.
from 2008. And funnily enough, and
Has there
I
been
didn't,
another Sydney team since the Kings?
there was obviously the Razorbacks
Oh,
from
yeah. Yeah.
1998 to 1908. I actually remember going to a
Oh,
Razorbacks game with,
1998 to when? 1908. Like
sorry,
we're talking
sorry, what
about
am I
Federation
doing?
here,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
the
To
convicts, the,
2008,
the
when there's
convicts
no Back
fighting
to the
the
Future.
the brothers or something. Yeah, okay, all right.
You know what I mean, 98 to 2008.
Yeah, I like
Thank you.
1908. I liked it that you said that.
Good
Wait,
pickup. Yeah.
and Razorbacks, what a great
Yeah,
mascot,
well,
you
I
know,
remember going to a game with you, Sydney Kings versus the Razorbacks.
with me.
Yes, and your cousin from
That's right.
Queensland. We
Christopher
did.
Cox up in Queensland.
Correct.
Yeah.
We did.
But
And
what year was that?
that
Because
would have been about 2007.
and Australian basketball was a flop. Like I remember it wasn't.
Yeah. And sadly the Razorbacks only went from 98 to 2008. It's had a 10-year run. But funnily enough, when I was doing my research, and I didn't realize this,
Mm.
and this made me realize how much out of touch I'd become with the whole NBL. Sydney actually weren't in the competition from 2008 to 2010. They were defunct for 2 years, for a couple of years.
But the whole competition almost went.
The
What year
Kings,
did it?
it almost went.
Whole
Yeah,
competition. Like what? Name a
yeah,
sport that
yeah.
the league almost gets canned.
I know. And it came very, very close. They
Yeah.
had a couple of millionaire investors that came through to save it.
Hey,
So,
hey, what
yeah.
did you mention the team, the Singapore Slingers? Remember them?
Singapore Slingers, yes. They
Yeah.
were from 2006 to 2008.
Yeah, I remember hearing them and I got a bit excited. I was like, this is great, making it international one. But it did.
Yeah, what killed them was the travel and the fact that it just cost too much money and logistically it wasn't great for home and away games. It
Yeah.
just died in the ass very quickly.
Cool name though, Slingers. You know,
Yes. And I
they,
think the problem,
you know what do we call the call than slingers? Slinkies. You know.
could have been, could have been. Yeah,
And they push him
absolutely.
down the stairs and they just charge out with these slinkies, you know.
They could have been the Slinkies. But yeah, I think early on though, a lot of these teams love the idea of just being in this national
Yeah,
competition. I
yeah.
think business wise, it was the wild, wild west.
Just couldn't
And
do it.
then when they were in it, they're like, we don't have the accountants and the
Yeah,
administrators to deal
yeah,
with this.
yeah.
And it became so much bigger than what they actually thought it
And
was.
it's not like Australia's like you can get from, Perth Wildcats to, to Brisbane Bullets to Melbourne, you know,
No,
it
no.
costs, it's far, it's
Yeah.
teams, it's flights, it's expensive, and we got
Yes.
about 30 seconds to go, Drew. We got to end this right now.
Finally, I want to just make reference to the Hunter Pirates that went from 2003 to 2006. Such a poorly run organisation that some of their own players had texter numbers on their actual arm
Yeah.
during the basketball trials. They had trouble getting their own jersey, and when they got there, they didn't have matching pants. But